Good evening. This is the Town of Raymond Budget Finance Committee meeting. I'd like to call a meeting to order. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes from the meeting on July 24, 2024?
Make that motion.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, it's unanimous. The motion carries. Next, we have the discussion of the expense and revenue reports for June and July. And I'd like to...
Here's an updated July sheet.
Okay, we have some printed out here. Thank you, Kathy.
It's updated one, I guess.
Thank you for your diligence on working on these reports for us.
That's the one of those. I want to see if they're any different.
Okay.
This one may be different. No, thanks. Oh, yeah. This one is definitely updated.
So that's the same. That's what we had around originally. Were you able to make any corrections to the June report, or is that still outstanding?
The June is still outstanding.
Okay. Are there any comments on the July report from the committee?
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
The question would be, is there anything that we should be aware of? Anything, could we get a brief rundown? I know it's early in the fiscal year, but anything of note that we should be aware of?
Sure, what's in there, if you look at your back pages, I'm sorry, you'll see that some of the insurances, if you're looking at page 8, and you look down at the expenses, you'll see that there's 0 budgeted, because those have been moved to each of the departments. Although you'll still see the current month there, but those will stay as 0 because it's been moved to each department. As well as the employee benefits, the dental, health, life, retirement, that's now under each individual department. At the request of the Board of Selectmen last year, we moved it. And your special revenue, page 8 at the top, your Parks and Rec is not yet in the system. So other than that, your budget is complete there.
This is probably not a question for you, but what's the rationale for moving that? I think it makes it much more confusing and difficult to see what you're expending in those areas. You have to go and add it up, of course. What's the rationale, do you know?
The rationale from the chair of the board at the time was he wanted to see each department, what it actually cost to run the department. So therefore, if you have your dental, your life insurance, all your taxes there, he thought we had a more complete picture.
Yeah, I'd like to have a discussion about that at some point, but I think it's, should be as it is in, most places in one cost center. That's my opinion.
Okay, and I think that we also, as a budget committee last year had discussed that we like to see the transparency of it within each department. So absolutely I agree that we can discuss that again, but I think that we were behind that.
Yes.
But absolutely we can discuss.
Yeah, I just think it's a non-standard way of doing it, so, but that's my opinion. If that's the, if it's something you're all agreeing to, then fine, but, okay.
At the time, the Budget Finance Committee agreed with it when that issue came up during the budget deliberations this past spring.
Yeah.
But we can discuss it.
Yeah, it's just not something that's usually done. Okay, thanks.
So Karen, you had asked about the June expenses.
Yes.
And it's what the budget numbers are wrong, but if you look back at your May reports, those numbers are correct.
Yes.
The expenses are in June, and the income and the expenses are in the June budget. It's just the budget number is what's incorrect. And we'll work on getting those fixed.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for this updated report, because I was wondering why we were $8,000 over in insurance, and it just like it was a numerical mistake on this first one. Insurance, it was marked as $2,369 when it's
Which one are you looking at? You in July?
Page 2, yeah.
Some of them have been updated, so look at the one I just gave you, Sean.
Yep, that's what I'm saying. Thank you for this update one, because I was going to ask why
Yep.
there was that much of a difference, but this makes much more sense.
Yeah, we had a few clerical issues in there that I apologize for, but
That's okay. No worries.
I think
You found them and you corrected them.
Sue found most of them, which was nice.
Oh, okay.
I'll give her credit for that.
All right. Well, thank you both for your due diligence.
At our last joint sessions with the selectmen, I had mentioned about getting more money for milfoil. And it looks like so far we're $4,000 over that budget. So this is a long ways off from next year, but I would still suggest that we increase that budget with milfoil. Was there a grant for milfoil? How was the milfoil handled? Was it just that item was going to specific?
We had a DEP grant, a 2-year grant. This is the second year that we've gotten the grant that goes directly for milfoil. We also bill 3 companies in town, and they contribute. Indian Point, what's the new? Indian Point, the condominiums, and then Goodhue. And Goodhue Marina. So we build them. The difference this year, Sean, is that the contractor who actually does the work, he went up on his prices. So when we did the budget, it was based on the numbers that we thought we had at the time.
Right.
So it's a 2-year grant. It's done this year. And then we'll apply for another one,
Okay.
because there still is milfoil.
That's why I'm thinking that next season coming up, we should increase that, because I think that was one of my comments, was I thought it was a little bit low.
Yes.
And
Last year, they told us they did a great job, and it was going down, and they expected it to decrease the number of dives that they had to do, the number of weeks.
that was incorrect, though. It sounds like, right?
Well,
It's a growing season.
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm sure-
The weather was good for growing milk,
Yeah, that was the only thing it was good for so far, right? All right.
that's why.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I may, I do want to thank Kathy. These aren't reports that she normally does. The finance director normally does them, and she put in a lot of work and did some really good work to get these for you. So once our new finance director starts next Tuesday, Brenda Fox Howard, then one of the things she'll be looking at first is to make sure that all the reporting and whatnot from last year are complete. And I hope, though I can't guarantee, that they'll be ready for September's meeting.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Kathy.
Are there any other comments on the June and July reports? Okay, all right, then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, discussion of a joint meeting with the select board. We had discussed that, and the select board has discussed that at their meeting recently. So, how would you like to go forward with that, Teresa?
So one of the things, if you want to, is put together some dates that you have and send it to Rolf. That would be available. Do you know what I mean? It's like we have Wednesdays open, we have Thursdays or whatever. But the best part of this is you guys can ask all kinds of questions. And that helped me before, when I was on the selectmen for the first time. And there's all kinds of questions you can ask, how each department, how each thing is done, working together and stuff like that. So I would probably reach out to Rolf, like I said, and just say, hey, when you want to do it. I would highly encourage just the 2 boards talking. That way where it's just us. Do you know what I mean? It's going to be videotaped. But this way, where it's just a workshop that we're throwing things back and forth.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, thank you. Well, I'm wondering, do we do could we do like a regular budget finance meeting on the third Wednesday of the month, and then after that break into a meeting with the select board, or do that before or after a regular?
Because the meetings aren't that long, so
yeah, we
we can do that.
Okay, is the rest of the committee interested in doing something like that at our September meeting?
Yeah,
Okay.
I would rather, so I mean, I would rather have as much time to discuss with them and not feel like we have to get to the next thing, so I would ask that we keep our business a little bit shorter maybe.
Yes.
Just because like, if we do spend a lot of time, if we're actually gaining knowledge and want to continue doing that, then I don't think that we should be constrained to having to go talk business right after, but I think that having the same night would be fine, just not feeling like we have to end things
Okay.
if we're on track.
Well, we could have a very short agenda, just go through, approval of the minutes, and then we could go adjourn our meeting and then go into the workshop with the select board. Does that seem reasonable to everybody?
Because that would help, right? Because then the finance director doesn't, sure.
That would give her another month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can even approve the minutes the following month, too.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All right. All right. Well, I'll approach Rolf about doing that.
And I've talked to him, too. And he's, he just said, figure out what you guys want to do, because I told him it was on the agenda tonight.
Okay. Okay. Next on our agenda is discussion regarding options on how to spend the money received from the Sebago Lake settlement. Sean, would you like to go
Yeah.
first? Do you have some options that you?
I don't know all the options. I'm sure that
Right.
some of the things that some of my ideas may not be allowed. So I'm going to throw some out there with the caveat of understand that they might not actually work. But whatever it is, I don't think it should go towards taxes. I'm going to be really wrong about the numbers, but I think the numbers were like something like $500,000 to lower taxes. And when we think about the grand scheme of things, what does that lower? Like for me on Main Street, it might lower it by like $15, but somewhere in the Cape, maybe $5. And I think that this money should be used more towards the next offense. I think it should be used as protection. There's two things I think it could be used for, either protection or some kind of investment back into the community. Right now with our budget cycle ended, from earlier this year, I think most of those big ticket items either got pushed off or have been paid for, or is going to be paid for example, like the fiber optics, for example. So really think that should be used for protection against the potential next violation. I know this violation was a little bit unique because it happened during COVID where somebody thought they could do what they did and get away with it. So I don't see something happening to that scale, but I could be wrong. So I would like to see money held for protection specifically that doesn't get touched unless we have another violation for the same reason. I don't think it should be used for a different, attorney fees for something different. It should be very specific towards a violation.
Okay.
So what you're saying is, I think I raised this point last time, major non-recurring capital expenditures is what you're saying, right, basically?
I'm sorry,
Major non-recurring capital expenditures versus tax relief.
yeah,
So the thing is to remember about this money, I think I saw a meeting where people talked about it as a windfall. It's not a windfall, it's a reimbursement to fund balance. So this is money the town had for the most part, and so now you get the money back, because that's mostly what we saw back was the legal fees. So the question would be, should you use an overstandard amount of money to reduce the tax rate for 1 year? Normally the town uses a couple $100,000 thereabouts. I think that's prudent and reasonable. That's what what's been done. But to supercharge the tax rate and reduce it with that money, I think, as you point out, is a very small difference. And it creates a problem for the next fiscal year because you don't have that money that year, so you're going to instantly create a significant gap. Now it's a reval year, so everything's going to be kind of messed up and difficult to decipher, but it's still, to me, not wise to use that amount of money in the next fiscal year, and then to create that, discrepancy between the 2 years with some, artificial infusion of cash you can't repeat. I like your idea. I mean, environmental protection, you're saying, something like that, when you say protection, or protection in general?
Protection against having to go into our funds again like we did this
Oh.
time. Protection in the sense of, so when we do have to hire an attorney, it doesn't come out of that money. Like, that money's set aside, and that if that's public knowledge that we have this money set aside to go after the next person, I think that will offer more protection for the town not to run into that, because there's kind of that fear of like,
understand
hey,
that. I
the
understand.
town has done this once, and we're ready to do it again. And it doesn't matter if it's on Big Sebago or if it's on on Panther Pond or any of the other lakes and ponds that we have.
Right.
But yeah, to answer your other questions, like, not so much environmental protection, but I mean, essentially that is environmental protection when you think about it. Yeah, that's, I don't have a very specific thing as far as what kind of other capital improvement we could use it in.
Well, typically, I mean, Raymond really hasn't done that because I haven't had, significant capital improvements for a long time here. But, in my experience in other towns, my previous town, for instance, that's exactly what we did. We would segregate that money and use it for major non-recurring capital improvements, like a new public safety building or a new town office or a new town garage, a new library. All these things were things we did. So we do it that way. Then you get something meaningful, or some new program or something that, would you have some capital requirements.
I was thinking about, I see Chris's hand raised in a second, but I was thinking, I thought about that, like, do we put it towards the school? Can we put it into a CD where it's gaining money for the next 3 years? That's a lot of interest. I know interest rates are going down, but that amount of money in a CD would be pretty significant. Do we put it towards the school, but even if, is that enough? I know it's a small portion, obviously, if we're going to decide what we do with the school. It's $500,000 that we didn't have before, but those are two of the options. I know Chris has got his hand raised.
Yes, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, my feeling is we should use some of this, if you want to call it a windfall, but Don's right. The majority of this money, the 540 we already got, covers about 440 in legal fees that we expended through the 3-year process. There's some monies that are coming that are a fine, and it's roughly between 175 and 200,000 coming in again in October, I think October 25th. So my thoughts are, there's a couple things I want to make you aware of. One is the town worked with the Cape to do, and I've said this before, to introduce a bill in the legislature, 2101, and that legislation will allow us as a town to lien a property after 30 days of a notice of violation. After the appeals period, we can put a lien on the property, not issue permits, and possibly revoke them. The second part of that discussion with the state, and Senator Tim Nagel and I are working again this year closely to work out some fine tuning of that bill that will allow towns to access a fund that the state is going to create that will be a pool of money that towns can, in any town, any lake in Raymond, can dip into to help cover those legal fees. That's going to take over a year, and then plus the 90 days it takes after it's enacted to take effect. So I would recommend that we use a portion of that money to either pad our legal expenses, because legal expenses in my experience in the last 3 or 4 years with all the activity we have on the lakes, with people that want to get away from the cities as a result of COVID, they are coming up, they're investing, building, tearing down buildings, and doing new construction. We are seeing some other violations. They're not going away. And as our building activity decreases, we will be able to do more enforcement. That costs money. We do usually get those funds back, but it's a burden on the town. And we saw that with the case at Fernwood, and Whitetail. So I think that it would be very prudent for us to set aside some money. I don't know what our budget is exactly for legal, but we should pad that amount. And if it's not used, it'll carry over and go into the general fund for the next year. But until this legislation gets passed, we run the risk of the same thing happening again. We're in hopes that because we can lien the property and do more incentives for people to come to the table and work with us, that we won't incur a 3-year legal bill. It'll get done much more efficiently. But I got to tell you, legal fees, if you have a municipal rate, it's in the area of $265 to $285 for a municipal rate from the attorneys in Portland. But the good attorneys are also in conflict with many of these violators because they have those people as clients. So, it's a kind of a catch-22. So we have to reach out to other firms. We don't get that municipal rate. And I think I've mentioned this before, and I'm going to say it again. We spend up to $6.25 an hour. And when you're sitting down at an appeals board meeting or mediation, those hours add up very quickly. And then sometimes it's not just one attorney, it's several. And we're seeing more and more of that on Sebago in particular. So I think Dawn and Sean are both right that we shouldn't use it as tax relief. We should be prudent and do some planning for our future. Enforcement is expensive. We do have a new code enforcement officer that's doing very well, and I do have help, but that's going to result in more enforcement actions as time goes on. Thank you.
So a portion of enforcement, what are you feeling that would be a good, if we were to ask for a budget for enforcement? So we have, we'll call it just a straight $700,000. What would you think?
If we have 700 now, I would increase it by 100. Does that answer your question, Sean?
So if so you're asking for all that money to go towards enforcement plus another 100? Did I understand you correctly?
Well, no. Let me back up.
Okay.
I think I interpreted what you said is if we had a legal budget of 700,000. No, I'm saying if we get 700, we ought to take 100 of it and put it towards
Take
legal.
100 of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's okay. I thought you said you add another 100 to it for. Okay, I understand. Yep. So.
You get it?
Yep. If we're getting 700, you're asking for 100,000.
And it's, I'm not asking for it. I
you
just
would
think it would be
suggest.
prudent that we plan ahead and have that in our budget somewhere. The contingency fund, Don probably can speak to that better than I can, but it isn't as healthy as it used to be because we've expended a lot of it in legal fees. Fortunately, we got it back, but in another case, we might not.
Yeah, I agree. How long? All right. So if we put, so you mentioned general fund too. If something's not spent, it goes to general fund. But if we have something very specific, like sidewalks, for example, we're not using it, just kind of carries over in the same fund. Are you saying that if we don't, if we give it a certain line item and we don't use it, it will go to the general fund?
Maybe a question that the new finance director could answer better than I can. At this point, I'm not sure if that should go. I think it should go into the general fund if it's not expended. But Don, correct me if I'm wrong.
You're right.
So we would want to keep that from happening, right? If we would want to keep it from just going to the general fund, we would want to have a very specific name on it.
Right. But
If it
right
just goes to
now, it would
general
go just to
fund.
the general fund. It would require an action of the Board of Selectmen and to segregate it, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It would make sense to segregate it so that it would be a continuing amount of money from year to year if it's not used.
Yeah.
Frank, that's a good point, and that's why I brought up the state's interpretation is they realize it's a problem, and they're going to set up a fund.
Right.
That fund isn't going to decrease every year. It's just going to be there and added to. So maybe we should look at, like the state of Maine, and have this fund some kind of a delegated environmental protection budget line item that doesn't go down. It's like a capital expense. It'll get moved forward instead of going into the general fund where it could get used to reduce taxes or anything else that the selectmen decide to do. I think our committee is charged with doing what's financially prudent for the town and giving that advice to the selectmen. So I think this is a great discussion, and I think I think the end result of this, I think we're going to talk about this more, could be very positive for the town to help us maintain our pristine environmental priorities in the town of Raymond. I'm also on the comprehensive plan committee with you, Sean, and Dawn, and Frank, and we're all trying to protect what we have. Change isn't bad, but these increases in shoreline development and the pressure on our town is getting tremendous, and it's getting national attention. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal last week, and I did an interview with a reporter that did an article on real estate, and the trend that Wall Street Journal is seeing is that many Americans are coming to Raymond to be on Sebago Lake and other towns surrounding Sebago. They're buying $2 to $4 million houses, they're ripping them down, and they're reconstructing compounds and extravagant luxury homes. And with that comes the potential for violations, and I think we're going to see increased pressure not only on Sebago. I see it on my lake. I live on Crescent. The pressure is unbelievable around the lakes. Everything that goes up for sale is sold, and somebody either remodels it completely or tears it down and rebuilds something new. So we've got to be prepared for that. We have to be resilient, in particular with our environment. Raymond, home of the landlocked salmon, and all our natural resources is why we're all here. And I can't express how much of a priority I feel that is. And hopefully this money, if it gets designated to a some fund or an account that will help the town maintain its integrity with our shorelines and mountains and streams and lakes, then I'm all for that.
Okay, thank you. Frank?
Yep. Are there other areas in enforcement of environmental standards that we're trying to keep up where money might be needed on a short-term basis very quickly, money that may not be available unless we had an account with this type of money in it? Other than legal, I mean, if there may become a time where you need to do something and do something quickly, and there's no money for it. But if we had a fund that you could draw from, it probably would make life a lot easier for you guys.
You know, Frank, that's a very good point. And what I'm going to say is a term that we don't hear very often, but unfortunately, we're hearing it more and more. I mean, I just experienced a 1-hour storm here at the house. We must have got 2.5 inches of rain in less than an hour. We're getting more and more storms that they're using the term 1,000-year storms. If you're paying attention to what happened in Connecticut, Danbury, they got 12 inches of rain, and that was a 1,000-year event. I've heard that many, many times in the past year. Global warming is happening, whether you want to believe it or not. The weather is changing, and it's getting very severe. We saw it with Debbie. We've seen it with Ernesto. It just doesn't stop. And I think that Raymond is very unique. We're high ground, but if you look at our roads, you just drive down Webb's Mills Road, Meadow Road, our roads being washed out constantly. Our public works can't keep up with it. And yes, we're going to have an event that's going to wash out a road. It's going to go into a lake, and we're going to have to do a cleanup. So yeah, Frank, you're right.
I would suggest that we come up with a definition of the things that would be needed, such as legal for the environmental piece, or where we may need money that wouldn't be immediately available, that we set aside a third of this money and put it in that fund that could be used when something like that comes in front of us. I had the same storm that you had The Public Works crew worked for 2 hours on the intersection of Mountain Road and McDermott Road yesterday, and it washed out. What they did washed out in the last hour and a half. And that's only a short example of the kinds of things we're facing. So I wouldn't be opposed to setting aside a third of the money aside to be used when we run into issues of enforcing our environmental laws.
So Frank, the other thing is, we used to have funds. The Raymond Waterways Association had got a 319 grant with the DEP, and I was one of the ones that I was living on Panther Pond at the time, and you could get a grant to help solve an erosion problem on your property, and it was a matching grant. The homeowner put in 50%, and the town kicked in the other. It was when Nora Lee Raymond was working with the town. She did that, and she also did the milfoil with Nathan and a bunch of other things, but there's no money left. So what I'm hearing from you is this fund, this pool that we got, or the monies we got from the violation on Sebago, could go, maybe it is a third. That's a discussion for another night. But I think you're right. You're on the right track. And I think as this committee, moves forward, I think these are the kind of discussions that are very prudent that we look at.
I think if I were to make a recommendation, and this is along the line of what I've been hearing here, would it make sense to take the actual fine amount, which is much smaller than the reimbursement, set that aside, and then just let the money that had come from fund balance go back to fund balance, and then when it comes time to mitigate the taxes, use the usual amount of money from fund balance, assuming that the auditor's recommended guidelines are met, and that's important, but I believe that they will be, because the town's always had strong fund balance. So basically, business as usual on tax relief. The balance of the money that came from fund balance to pay for the legal effort would go back, and then the actual fine, which is much smaller, a small part of this whole thing, would be set aside, segregated, and that require the selectmen to do that. Is that what you're all saying?
Oddly enough, that's probably about a third or less.
That's
maybe
a small
20%.
amount. That's a small amount when you look at the violation. Yeah.
Right. Yep, you're right.
Anyhow, that's what I would do. So it's basically what you're saying, to set up that fund, protection fund. But I think the answer to how to spend the money is put the money back in fund balance, because that's where it came from. And then, it's up to the selectmen and the department heads to recommend the selectmen to decide how they want to spend it, I guess, or not spend it. But, having a strong fund balance is very important. So I don't think spending it on tax relief is really a very good idea at all. But perhaps spending it some other way might be okay, assuming that you had, the capacity. And I would say major non-recurring capital expenditures, not something that's going to, come and go in 1 year. Like you said, maybe some other program or some other, capital facility like the school or something. But then the argument on that will be, well, you can borrow money cheaper than you can set aside money, and they used to have a thing called capital reserve budgeting, where towns would set aside money, year to year, and then save up for the Yankee sort of approach, 10, 15 years, and they'd say, well, now we have the money to buy a fire truck. And that worked, but you're also losing the capacity year to year because of the cost of inflation, and so you get basically a return on your investment, but you have inflation, so it's kind of a wash in some instances. And then the other thing is that the people who, this is an argument I used to hear, and it's true, would be the people who paid into the fund, let's say for 15 years towards the fire truck, may not necessarily be the people who benefit from it, because they're moved from the town, dead and gone, whatever. And so the idea became many years ago to bond for improvements, and Raymond did that. And I think that makes sense, to bond for improvements. But maybe there's something special you want to do. Like when the school was built, I think there was money needed to build a special gym. Maybe there's something, extraordinary you want to do. So maybe that would make sense to use that money.
Are we able to put some kind of portion? So let's just say that, hey, listen, we want to use this for something special.
Yeah.
Can we does the town have a history of putting money into a CD? Is that something that we can kind of gain interest on for?
Yeah, the town's, restricted by law to certain, financial instruments, very conservative instruments. So, yeah, sure. The town's monies are always invested in making interest,
Okay.
surplus monies.
Interesting.
But I think it's the selectmen's thing, really. It's not our thing, other than, to make a recommendation. But I think that tax relief, I think, is a bad idea. Setting up an environmental protection fund for a portion of it, that small portion that was actually the fine, that's a good idea. Putting the rest back where it came from would be my recommendation. And then if the selectmen want to do something, then they would propose it. Something like a capital reserve fund, like you're saying, for something.
But
Or
we
we
could still
could-
have input on that. That's
Or we
what
could
I-
recommend something if you have an idea, but I don't really have an idea right this minute.
I don't, and that's why I was suggesting the CD was like, hey, listen, we don't have an idea. Of
You
what this
wouldn't
is yet.
segregate the money without an idea, without a plan.
Okay.
So it should go back to fund balance. My opinion.
So have an idea
Have a plan.
first would be, yeah, okay. And if we didn't, then it would.
So if we're making a recommendation, I think it's the actual fine monies put into a legal protection fund. The bulk of the money, which is actually just a reimbursement of the expended legal fees, would go back to fund balance. And, as far as tax relief, you'd use the amount of tax relief that you normally do, assuming that you have that under the auditor's guidelines. So that's what I would say.
Any other ideas or any other comments?
Is Dina still there? Does Dina have any suggestions?
Well, I was going thinking of how we can but it's going to be so hard to be proactive regarding, like Chris was mentioning, the flooding that's happening far more frequently. And I feel like it would be less expensive to be proactive about some of these things versus reactive about it. But I don't think what we would have for funding would even touch it. But it's something to look for and look at, because we live here and we know the areas that are starting to flood, even with just a few inches of rain, and just seeing if there's things that we can do to potentially mitigate that. I think that's something we really need to look for and look towards.
Bud, you got anything?
No, I'm listening.
Okay.
I'm very, very much in favor of putting at least the fine into a fund that's readily available to combat anything else that comes along, and perhaps to use it for emergency abatement if, again, you washouts or something like that. So we aren't spending all kinds of time going through a long funding cycle. I also agree with Dawn that the money that was spent on lawyers' fees was taken out of everybody else's hide, and it probably ought to go back where it came from. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. It's middle of the road, but it's a lot to digest in a short period of time. But I definitely believe in setting if you will, an emergency fund, something that rolls from year to year, and that's the biggest thing. So it doesn't get lost back into the general fund if it's not spent. That it's still there on July 1st, even though it wasn't spent on the end of June.
Yeah.
If you needed it on the 1st of July, you had it.
Interesting what Chris said. So 10 years ago, actually now over 10 years ago, if anybody remembers, it wasn't in this area, but Hurricane Sandy, which was classified as a superstorm because they classified as a superstorm, the insurance companies didn't have to pay out the same way. Wrecked the entire East Coast. I was living in Long Island, New York at the time. My hometown, Long Beach Island, got devastated. And I was watching some things that happened in Long Island yesterday or the day before, a lot of washouts around where I had lived. And we're talking about seeing those same things happening here. Yeah, I think that protection, however we want to say protection, environmental protection, or whatever, I think is, I think that's very proactive, like Deanna was saying. I like to be proactive rather than reactive.
So is that something that we're recommending, or is that just a discussion item for tonight?
Should we bring that up in our joint?
I think that's probably a smart idea.
The joint wouldn't be about any of this. It would just be about procedures and protocols. I took a bunch of notes on this. I'm going to give it back to the board so they know.
Teresa, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, Chris. Sorry about that. The joint meeting is pretty much going to be not for this type of thing. It's going to be for like protocols, how each department works, and different questions on how to do things and stuff like that. This is something that would be like taken up like in a board meeting. So I took a bunch of notes of what you guys had said, and what I'm hearing is like a majority of it would be putting it in for an emergency, like a third of it for that emergency fund, in case roads get washed out or whatever. But I'm going to relay all this stuff back to Rolf, and then we can either bring it up the meeting or whatever, or you could even send in that email to him if you want to summarize everything up. Karen, what's easier for you?
Well,
I think if it's a recommendation, we should make a motion and take a vote.
I agree.
That's what we should do.
I think that's what we should do.
And if it's not, then, we should carry it over to another meeting to discuss, further.
Okay, does the committee feel ready to make a motion and move forward with that? Or would you prefer to wait and make the motion at another meeting?
I think that I'm ready to make the motion, and I think it's important because there's going to be a decision made to set the tax rate. And so I think you need to send that, recommendation before they set the tax rate. I think there was some discussion that to use the money as some kind of windfall to reduce taxes for 1 year. And I don't think that's.
Can I just add something?
Sure.
At that meeting, you had talked about opening the meeting and approving the minutes. I'm sorry, I totally slipped my mind on that. Let's have that joint meeting at the workshop and before the workshop, and then switch into a workshop if that's what you want to do. Do you know what I mean? So where we can discuss this at, a public meeting, the two of us together.
Vote it tonight.
And then that way where you guys will know more about, what you can do, what you can't do, because I'm not positive, you know what I mean, on that. So this way where we can have that, and Rolf's the one that's got it for both sides. Do you know what I mean? He knows the budget finance inside and out, and he knows the select board inside and out. So, 1 second, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is if we have that meeting in the beginning, we can talk this out publicly in a live meeting, and then we can go into a workshop if you want to do that. Don's not even listening.
Karen?
Okay.
I'm in agreement with
Motion.
Don.
There's nothing that prohibits, what we're recommending, and I think if you make the motion and it's approved tonight, then it can go to that meeting and have that discussion. But I don't think there's, anything gained by pushing it off and talking to Rolf about it. It's perfectly appropriate.
Okay. I feel that we should move forward with a motion, and the committee will make a statement by how they feel about it, and then we can, once the motion goes through or doesn't go through, then the select board will understand where we're coming from, and then we can have that discussion at the joint meeting.
Right.
I think that would work. Chris?
Yeah, I'm agreeing with Don. I'm ready to make a recommendation tonight to the select board that I'm not making the motion. I think, Don, you'd be better at making the motion, but I would be willing to vote on this tonight. I think we have enough information and it's that important that we don't use those funds to go into tax relief, that we just make the recommendation and then we'll have the discussion.
Okay. All right. Cliff, did you have something to say?
The only thing I'd have to add is, I don't think there's any question that we take the fine part and put that into a slush fund, whatever you want, an emergency fund, and I think it should be stated as such in the motion, and then the rest of it goes as Dawn said. Do you agree with that, Dawn?
Yeah.
So we specify where that piece is going anyway, as a strong, firm recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, because I really don't want to see that go back into general. I don't want to lose that.
That's my only concern, that we get that piece, and then the rest of it, then we go the other way, and it's open for a lot more discussion.
Okay. So, Don, do you want to make the motion?
I guess so. I thought you were going to do this, but
Oh, and real
basically-
quick, can I just, I'm so sorry. I know we were talking about exactly what you guys were talking about, and I know we had mentioned something about increasing from that fine, part of it to go to legal. Do we want to break it down in this, or are we just doing like an overall, it's not going to taxes protection?
I'm going to break it down.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That's what my thoughts are. Break it
My
down.
thought.
So I would move that with respect to the Sebago settlement monies, that the town set up a legal and environmental protection fund, recommend to the Board of Selectmen that be set up with the actual fine money, which is a much smaller amount of money than the actual monies that were returned from the violation. So basically, set up a legal and environmental protection fund with the fines themselves. The money that came from fund balance to pay the legal fees should go back to fund balance. And I would add another angle on this, and that is that we would recommend that the Board of Selectmen use the reasonable and appropriate funds that they have used in the past to reduce the taxes for this year, in keeping with, practices far back as I can remember. So assuming fund balance has the capacity, that's the amount of money we would use to reduce taxes. And that's not a very good motion, but I'm just saying that's what I would recommend.
Well, that's why I asked you to do it, because it was better than mine.
It's too complicated, but basically, I guess, so the motion would be to set the fine money aside into an environmental and legal protection fund. The balance would go to fund balance to reimburse the legal fees expended. And then the recommendation for taxes would be to use something in keeping with past practice.
And Chris, do you want to have a dollar amount specific on it? Did you want?
We need to move on the motion.
Okay.
It's the
We need to
fine
move on
amount.
the motion. You've made the
Fine amount,
motion,
yeah.
so we need to have a second to the motion.
So we need a second?
We need a second to the motion. We'll discuss.
I'll second.
All right, Cliff will second it. Okay, now we can have further discussion on the motion on the floor.
Sorry about that. So it's been answered. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Trying to stick to the
Yeah.
parliamentary procedure.
Yeah. Don't let me derail it. So I don't have any further discussion on it.
Anyone else have any
Fine.
further discussion? Okay.
Well, yes. Weren't we talking about, Sean, did you want a dollar amount tonight? Or just, what I would recommend, and I don't know that we need to amend the motion, because we're going to have numbers that we can use that are our legal fees that were expended, and then what we got in the fine. I don't know, I don't want to quote those numbers tonight, but those are easy to get. And the way, Dawn, you presented that, I'm comfortable with that, because you broke it down into legal and fine. So that's pretty easy to come up with those numbers.
Okay. I would agree.
I'm good.
All right. Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor of the motion to have the town set the legal and environmental protection fund with the fine money and the fund balance to pay the legal fees back to the fund balance, and the town to use the usual procedures for the taxes to continue with that process. Okay. All those in favor? Okay. Any opposed? None opposed. It was unanimous, so the motion carries. Okay. Is there any public comment for this evening? Okay. Budget Finance Committee comment?
One comment.
Okay.
Just a reminder, next Wednesday, August 28th at 6:30 p.m. will be a workshop to discuss the Comprehensive Plan 2025 update. That's going to be held at Jordan Small Middle School gym. Workshop is open for all town committees and boards, and I know Peter would mention that, but he's not here tonight. So please join us next Wednesday to hear the updated comprehensive plan.
Anyone on Zoom have any comments? No?
I'm all good.
Right, anyone else here? Any comments? All right, we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.